It looks like there is some heat that is being caused by some friction of an article that's been written about General Milley that has been posted over on the Atlantic, which this has been titled The Patriot, and essentially it paints him in this positive light as he's had to fight adversary against people such as Donald Trump during his presidency and some of the issues that were arisen from that political atmosphere, and on top of that, what was happening in the country, and on top of that, how the military was dragged through that. If you guys are down to support small creators such as myself here, we do have the new fall line drop of Drink to the Foam, keeping in the high traditions of the U.S. military out there, not sponsored or endorsed by them, but this is a drop that's happening this fall only. There are cups, there are shirts, specifically beer mugs as well, if that's your kind of thing where you would drink this out of it. A lot of people have looked at General Milley in a negative spotlight in many accounts, and one of the two main things that they could discuss about this were in talks of the issues of the Afghanistan pullout and the failed debauchery of that, where we had 11, I think, or 13 service members pass away. But on top of that, there was also people saying that General Milley has also been at the forefront of woke ideology being injected into the military when it's come to transgender issues and things like that as well. So, but this paints him in a positive light of looking through his career and how he came to where he's at. But specifically, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the issues between him and the Navy SEAL, or former Navy SEAL, I'll say now, Eddie Gallagher, where he was being charged with war crimes at this point, and people are looking at him saying he'd taken the life of a 17-year-old, and, you know, the whole court proceeding went through, and through that entire process that was there, he was found not guilty of doing that, but he was found guilty of taking pictures with this body that was there. And there were people that were trying to take his rank away, take away his trident, but it looks like President Trump had actually interjected into that and had given those back to the service member. Now, that is mentioned a little bit in this article, and we're going to cover that because there is a rebuttal from the team over at Eddie Gallagher as well with his legal team. They say soon after becoming chairman, Milley found himself in a disconcerting situation, trying and failing to teach President Trump the difference between appropriate battlefield aggressiveness on the one hand and war crimes on the other. In November of 2019, Trump decided to intervene in 3 different cases that had been working their way through the military justice system. In the most infamous case, the Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher had been found guilty of posing with the corpse of an Islamic State prisoner. Though Gallagher was found not guilty of murder, witnesses testified that he'd stabbed the prisoner in the neck with a hunting knife. Gallagher's nickname was quotations Blade, an extraordinary move Trump reversed the Navy's decision to demote him in rank. They also say this particular intervention was erroneous for the Navy because by tradition, only a commanding officer of a group of SEALs on a Trident review board are meant to decide if one of their own is unworthy of being a SEAL. Late one night on Air Force One military tried to convince Trump that his intrusion was damaging Navy morale. They were flying from Washington to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware to attend a quotations dignified transfer, the repatriation ceremony for fallen service members. Mr. President, Milley said, "You have to understand that the SEALs are a tribe within a larger tribe, the Navy, and it's up to them to figure out what they do with Gallagher. You don't want to intervene. This is up to the tribe. They have their own rules that they follow." Trump called Gallagher a hero and said he didn't understand why he was being punished. Quotations being he slit the throat of a wounded prisoner, Milley said. Quotations from Trump say the guy was going to die anyway. Milley answered, quotation, Mr. President, we have a military ethics and laws about what happens in battle. We can't do that kind of thing. It's a war crime. Trump answered that he didn't understand the big deal. He went on, you guys, meaning combat soldiers, are all just killers. What's the difference? At which point, frustrated Milley summoned one of his aides, a combat veteran SEAL officer, to the President's Air Force One office. Milley took hold of the trident pin on the SEAL's chest and asked him to describe its importance. The aide explained to Trump that by tradition, only SEALs can decide, based on assessments of competence and character, whether of their own should lose his pin. But the President's mind was not changed. Gallagher kept his pin. If you guys like what I cover on this channel, I would greatly appreciate if I've earned your subscription. Have you hit that subscribe button as we're on our way to 200,000 subs. And this is just the battle of the moral dilemma that played out across news organizations everywhere that were talking about this. But, you know, I will say you get one free read for this article. I'd say read it. You know, obviously, I think a lot of people have speculation of the things I discussed earlier in this video, but also now watching the Parlator group come out after this and kind of speak against these things of his ideology that the military will sort itself out seems to fall on deaf ears for this lawyer and attorney that did represent Eddie Gallagher during his case.
I have a few things to say about Mark Milley, the soon-to-be former, although not soon enough, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As he goes off into retirement, he will be remembered by many in the veteran community as the guy who led the efforts to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in the terribly botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, resulting in the needless deaths of 13 U.S. Marines. But see, to Mark Milley, that doesn't matter as much as his own reputation. And that's why yesterday, The Atlantic published a glowing profile of him called The Patriot, and how Mark Milley tried to save the Constitution from Donald Trump. Most of what's in that article I'm not going to talk about because I wasn't there. But one piece I am going to talk about. Because in an article where he's trying to portray himself as the savior of the Constitution, he talked about a conversation he had with Donald Trump to try to prevent the president from getting involved in post-trial proceedings for the Eddie Gallagher case. Now, I tried Eddie Gallagher's case in front of a jury. And apparently, in November, so several months after the jury verdict, Mark Milley sat with President Trump as they were discussing the Navy SEALs' effort to remove his trident and said, "Mr. President, you have to understand, the SEALs are a tribe within a larger tribe, the Navy. And it's up to them to figure out what to do with Gallagher. You don't want to intervene. This is up to the tribe." Well, newsflash, Mark. Several months earlier, there was a jury verdict. Constitutional jury verdict that said he was not guilty. This whole tribal justice that you're trying to push, or tribal retribution, was not something that was being done by the SEAL community at all. It was being done by one man, Admiral Colin Green, one of your fellow senior officers. And as you were trying to protect your Admiral buddy, very soon thereafter, your boss, the Secretary of Defense, fired the Secretary of the Navy because of how that case had been badly botched. You went on in this article. Trump called Gallagher a hero and said he didn't understand why he was being punished. Because he slit the throat of a wounded prisoner, Milley said. Did you miss the jury verdict? Did you not understand that in our constitutional system of justice, you present the evidence in a courtroom before a jury, and then when the jury speaks and they say not guilty, you accept the constitutional verdict? You don't then encourage some kind of tribal retribution by your Admiral buddy, Colin Green. As I read this article, I was stunned that Mark Milley is trying to paint himself as a savior of the Constitution while specifically telling a story here about him violating the Constitution, about him trampling on the Constitution. He goes on and says, "Mr. President, we have military ethics and laws about what happens in battle. We can't do that kind of thing. It's a war crime." Here's a question, Mark. If you believe in tribal retribution as opposed to the constitutional process, you received an order from a judge that found that the prosecutors in that case had violated multiple constitutional provisions. They violated the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment. What type of tribal retribution are you advocating for them? What type of retribution or accountability at all? Or are you okay with that because they were trying to get the judgment that you wanted as opposed to the one that was supported by the facts, the evidence, and the law? Sorry, Mark. You can't exactly put out an article trying to claim to be the savior of the Constitution when you treat it like this.
what he's referencing to as far as a savior is earlier on in this article, talking about trying to establish boundaries with President Trump in this article in regards to where the military line starts and where the political line ends, essentially, is what he's talking about, as there are many issues as far as that went on through his time and tenure as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which had been known that he'd actually been caught over at a photo op incident with President Trump at the time in front of a church that was vandalized during some of the riots that happened back in 2020, and he said he wasn't supposed to be there. If you guys don't remember, there were a lot of claims during this entire trial where they were trying to claim that Eddie Gallagher was trying to tamper with witnesses. On top of that, emails which are including some form of spyware being sent to the defense as well, trying to capture data from the defense to understand what was going on behind closed doors, which both those things were very illegal. So on top of the charges that were already being brought up against him at that time. So looking at this, there's a lot to unpack, but it's crazy that I think this trial and this case specifically will be held as a standpoint in some kind of note in time of where you've seen the overlapping in stance from a president getting involved, from, military justice system, as far as, all these issues that kind of culminate into one massive storm that even for me that reads this stuff on a regular basis, I find myself having a hard time wrapping my head around it because there's so many sides to this story. But and this is where I get to the final part of the story where I ask, what do you guys think about the legacy of General Milley, as that's going to come to a final closing here at his 43rd year in September here, and the step in this light of the Atlantic saying he was a great military general that had a lot of issues that he was facing and he was actually a hero in this situation? Or what do you think about the other side as well, and kind of looking at that side? Because I think both sides should be discussed down in the comments below, because that's where the conversation continues. But as always, if you guys like what I cover on this channel, hit me up over on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, or down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.